Good evening. My name is John Titus, and welcome to another edition of Jiva Live. We have a great panel of guests for you this evening discussing diversity and inclusion in today's game. Like always, we ask that you get involved by sending your questions to us while watching on Facebook Live. We are going to run things a little bit differently this evening and supply you with a guest host who I had the privilege and pleasure of getting to know over this many years, Carl France. Among other things, Carl is the assistant coach for the NYU men's team and a member of the AVCA diversity team. Without further ado, I give you Carl France.
Thank you, John, and it's a pleasure to be here on Jiva Live and have this important discussion about diversity and inclusion at all levels of volleyball. Joining us today are two of my good friends. Robert Rios is a gentleman who's worked with me on the AVCA diversity development team for many years, since the reformation of that organization. And he's also the boys director of Vegas United in Las Vegas, Nevada. And he's also one of the big brains behind SCVA High Performance and rekindling that operation. And he's also worked at USA Volleyball and coached at the collegiate level. So thank you, Robert, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And then Jen Fry is probably one of the people who many have heard about when it comes to social justice and talking about inclusion and diversity around the country. She's a former volleyball player. She's a former coach. She is now in her PhD, getting her PhD at that school in East Lansing at Michigan State. I know Go Green. I'll say it for once. I can't really do it because I'm a hockey fan and Bowling Green and all that stuff. But anyway, she is able to join us today, squeezing us in at Jiva Live to talk about some of these diversity and inclusion topics. So I thank you, Jen, as well. The first question, I will go to Robert on this one. The first question is, you're a club director. How can there be an easier way to help diversity help coaches become more diverse or better with their diversity message or inclusionary messages as they are working in your program or in any other program?
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, John, and thanks, Jiva. I think what we're finding is it's important to look at your membership. It's important to look at your community and do everything you can to make sure your leadership within your program is matching your community. And the ways that we do that here is we've had the great privilege of having Jen come out and work with our staff, work with some of our athletes that chose to attend. I am consistently harassing Jen for information. I'm consistently looking to Jen and others for important conversations. And then we really do here try to develop our coaching body to represent. I'm really proud in our girls side of our program, we have all women coaches. I'm the only person that happens to be male on the girls side of our program. And that's not by accident. That's a very intentional effort to go out, find the best coaches, find the best people, and teach them the elements of the game so that they're able to succeed and ascend. And that's a really important part of what we do. And it's intentional. It's intentional.
And Jen, he brought you out there to speak to his group, or he's definitely picked your brain. What are some of the things that you can tell us that are listening today, things that can help them be better coaches and be more inclusionary and be better with diverse populations?
Yeah, thank you. He did, and it was a great time. And I think the first thing is understanding there is no easy way. This is not easy. Doing diversity inclusion work in your club, in your community, trying to bring in diverse populations is not easy. So we have to get away from that. It's kind of like winning a championship. Winning a championship is not easy. It's uncomfortable, it's difficult, and that's the same when we're talking about diversity inclusion. So I think that clubs and club directors need to understand that I think the second thing is to understand that diversity does not breed inclusion. You can bring in diverse populations into a very unsafe community. And so if you are a club director, you have to look at that community. Is this truly safe for people of color? Because people of color talk and they will say, we've had these problems at this club. The club director never talked about them. We have this situation and we're not going again. So you have to understand that inclusion starts before diversity happens. And if you're white and you have a predominantly white club, you have to acknowledge that. So many times I see coaches and club directors who are like, I'm not colorblind. I treat everyone the same. I don't see what the problem is. Why is this about race? And then they have 2 Black volleyball players out of 300 and don't even try and acknowledge what their experience is. If you don't see race, you don't see those 2 Black girls out of 300 and see the potential microaggressions, macroaggressions, the trauma that could be occurring. And many times white club directors don't want to say, well, that would never happen at my club. Instead of saying that probably is, how do I fix it? It needs to go away from that isn't happening, I've never heard about it, to it most likely is, looking at the numbers we have, what do we need to do to start fixing it amongst our staff, amongst our coaches, and to start educating our players?
That's a really great point. And I remember when I was coaching with one of the many clubs I've coached in Geneva, where I had a woman who was Hispanic on my team, and I had a Black woman on my team, and I had the rest of the team was white. And there's some things that you just don't even notice you say or you do. And if you come from a male culture and you coach men, you say, hey guys, let's go. And that's not good language either. What are some of the things that one would say, Robert, and this is something that you can easily dive to because you're in that situation right now with the coaching that you're doing in your gym and during this pandemic. What are some of the things that can be said or best practices? Because we know that we're not getting the coaching education from our great organizations. We're not getting that. We're not getting that talk about diversity and how you can be more inclusive from the CAP clinics, from FIVB, from art coaching, from all of those things. How can we fix our own house, so to speak?
I think it's important to listen to what Jen has to say. It's not easy. And I think, moreover, as a club director, we're not going to be perfect. We are going to get it wrong. And that can't be the reason why we don't continue to try. It can't be the reason why we don't continue to get information. It can't be the reason we don't continue to try to be better. We're going to get things wrong. And like Jen said, we can have the most wonderful athletes in our program. And in this culture of social media and memes, there are things that are shared and transferred and posted without thought. And there's no easy way around those things. And it's really challenging for us as club directors because I think the reality is we're dealing with minors. We were in a college setting or we're running a corporation. I think that you can have a pretty strong response. And so for us, it is starting with our coaching staff. It is starting with the adults in our program. And then it's trying to work with families. And I think it's trying to set the tone, and it's stating plainly that this behavior, racist behavior is wrong. Homophobic behavior is wrong. And trying to give messages and trying to give education. So I do think that that's challenging. When we talk about what language do we use in our gym, I think you just treat people like human beings. You treat people well. And it's really tricky. I think it's tricky to try to get away from slang. There are famous quotes in coaching about not using sarcasm. I fail massively at not using sarcasm. That said, I am also a person who has many, many times gone back to my athletes and said, what I said was wrong. And when I do that, I actually will do it in front of the whole team, the whole group. I think it's really important for us as coaches, if we're going to address athletes in front of a team, then we have to learn to apologize in front of that same group of people, not individually. It has to be in front of the whole group. And that's something that I think I try to model in our program. And I hope our whole coaching staff sees and embraces, because I think, again, it's not easy, as Jen said. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. We have to be committed to being better, not perfect, but better. and continuing to learn. And when I make a mess in any area of life, going back and cleaning it up. And what does that involve? And sometimes that's, I don't have the answer and I need to look to other people to help me find the answer. Not ask them to do the work for me, but help shine a light on the areas where I have ignorance or a lack of information, or a lack of perspective or a lack of experience.
Jen, this is something that I wrote down and I wanted to get your thought on it. You coached for many years after being a player at the Division II level. Would you have coached differently if you knew then what you know now?
100%. Head coach at 27 at the Division I level is completely different than if I was a head coach at 40. I think a few of the things I would do different is I would allow my athletes to challenge me more. As coaches, we do not want our athletes to challenge us. We don't want them to challenge us about practice plans, about drills. We don't want them to challenge us. We don't want them to critically think. Oh, look, they're just the darling daughters that, they're just going to ask questions. No, some of these kids really want to know. And we're not giving them the critical thinking skills to be able to challenge and have dialogue. Instead, we're like, no, oh, they're just being annoying, because we don't want to have to justify ourselves. We've been doing the same practice, the same drills, the same lineup, the same, that we don't have a justification for it. And when they want to challenge us, we get pissed off. And trust me, when I was young, I did the same thing. So I think allowing our athletes to have those critical thinking skills to say that maybe what I'm doing for this time isn't the right thing to do. Because some of these athletes have some great knowledge that we're not allowing them to tap into because of our ego. So I think that'd be the first thing. The first thing would be that allowing them to have critical thinking skills. The second thing would to not keep saying I have an open door, because an open door does not acknowledge power structures. I just have an open door. They can come talk to me at any time. They just haven't decided to talk to me. That's not my fault. There's a reason they're not talking to you. These athletes will talk your ears off. They will talk about everything. If they're not talking to you, there is a reason, and you don't want to acknowledge it. You saying you have an open door is not acknowledge that you have power in that situation. And so acknowledging that, talking to them, building that trust. But I think, to me, not saying have the open door, but role modeling, like Rio said, when you make a mistake, apology in front of people, role modeling being vulnerable, role modeling having tough discussions, role modeling being vulnerable, empathetic, that can create the communication. So I'd say those are probably the two things I would do differently. And also not care about what they wear. Like, y'all have to wear the same shirt, the same socks. You have to have your hair this way. You have to have your bag that way. Who gives a shit? Like, that doesn't matter. Are they going to come and play? Are they going to be the best person possible? I don't care if you have blue hair, you have a mohawk that's crooked. I don't care. Because if we take away them being authentically themselves to be this mold of what we want, we're taking away things that can maybe elevate their game.
Is there, as a coach, do you think that socioeconomic status is something that is missed within the realm of club volleyball, and then maybe even at the collegiate level, as these young ladies and young men go through the system? And what I mean by that is, hey, we're going to go to a restaurant, and then that player doesn't have the disposable income. Their parents don't have the income that another parent does. So then it's kind of like, well, yeah, she makes her food, as opposed to we stop at Panera Bread and get something, those kind of things. Is that something that either one of you would like to discuss? Because I'm sure it happens, and it's something that I think many club directors and club coaches who are very young themselves don't understand.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Jen, I'll start, and you can certainly clean up my mess. What I would say is, we are really proud and committed in our program. We give approximately $40,000 to $50,000 a year in tuition assistance, as we're a nonprofit, and that's a really vital part of our mission. For us to expand and to give opportunities, our mission statement is to create life-altering possibilities via volleyball. That's our mission statement, and we really try to live that. And again, without fear of getting it wrong sometimes, we just still try to live it and correct when we misstep. part of the reality is that we do have a lot of athletes, and when we are talking with a family when we're talking to a family of need, it's always one private. Obviously, it's very confidential. And part of the discussion is, hey, here's this team structure. Here's where this team will be traveling. Here's what this team will be doing. How do we assist you and your child to have the same experience or as close to the same experience as what the other athletes are going to have? Meaning hotels and flights and meals. Because what we don't want is to set an athlete aside in a negative way where, everybody's flying United or Delta, but one athlete is flying Spirit in the middle of the night, or not even getting a plane ticket, or we go to eat and everybody says, well, let's go to Whole Foods grocery store, and we have two people who are like, Whole Foods, that's like $16 for like salad, right? So I think it's just being aware of those things and trying to give better boundaries, trying to give more responsible boundaries, trying to have conversations that dignify people or allow people to maintain dignity, I think is hugely important. So we never want to make kids feel unnecessarily separate or different in a negative context. And we try to do that. And we try to address that ahead of time, even before the season starts. I will also tell you that we empower our coaching staff. If we know that there's a situation, we have meetings with our coaches before, if we're at a tournament in Chicago or wherever, and say, hey, listen, let's keep an eye on these few athletes, again, privately as a coaching staff. And you have my authority to make sure that athlete eats. With you just taking the bill, that athlete never knows, and then give me your receipt and we'll take care of it. But we want to make sure that we're protecting the dignity of these children as human beings and giving them the same experience, because I think that's a part of what they're signing up for. They're not just signing up to get better at hitting a go ball. They're signing up to try and have the same caliber, quality of overall experience, I hope, and that's what we're trying to provide.
Yeah, I agree with Rios a ton. So there's this theory, and it's called the standpoint theory. And it's the idea that the most marginalized have the best view of society. And so it's a theory that really clubs should direct. They should say, okay, let's look at what's the price points that we should have our meals at, so that the person that maybe is socially economically challenged can still have those meals, versus the person that makes the most money gets to decide where we eat at. Because that's what tends to happen, is that like, oh, well, we know we have a few players that make, their parents make X amount of dollars, so we can go these places. And that's just not acceptable, of saying, okay, what are the price points that we need to abide by? And talking with the team mom or whoever's doing the reservation and saying, these are our price points for, we're going to make sure we get breakfast for free. We're going to make sure that lunch is at $8 price point. We're going to make sure dinner is at this price point. Okay, it's a 4-day tournament. Let's see where we can save money at. We can buy pizza here. We can make sandwiches. And being more economic than just saying, hey, we can buy all these foods. Or, how parents will make like little goodie bags. Okay, this is your goodie bag for this amount of time. And thinking economically, it's also when you're at these tournaments of not going and being like, okay, we're going to go this park and all these places that cost a lot of money. Where can these athletes go that's going to be free, so that people aren't sitting there? Because it blows my mind the cost to go. You have this stay and play, which the hotels are more. Then it's $40 per person to come in to watch your kid, where you've already spent $800 for them to play in this tournament. Then if you want a bottle of water, it's $8. A hot dog is $15. And then of course they want a t-shirt. Like, it's so expensive. And so we have to say, we're going to give them, like Rio said, a great experience, but we're not going to do it of them going to all these expensive places. Because at the end of the day, all the girls or boys want is to be with each other so they can be on their phones, take pictures, and hang out. That is it. And they will do that anywhere that there's going to be a good experience.
That is something that I really strive to do anytime I'm coaching with, and I'm at one of the most prestigious universities in the world, at NYU, where most of these parents are more than worth $250,000. And even there, we still have these kind of talks. So this is really interesting. Jen, can you describe your experience as a player? How was that then compared to how you coached your athletes toward the tail end of your coaching career?
I will tell you, I refereed and I coached against the type of player I was. I was that smart mouth player, if you can even imagine it. I know it's a surprise. I know, Rios, you can't imagine, but I was that smart mouth player. I was the one to be a smart mouth to the officials. There was an official years ago, Tammy Elliott, who was one of the officials when I coached at Norfolk State, and her and I would get into it. And then we were like, okay, we could be friends. And we would go after each other. But I made sure that when I coached or refed, I was opposite of who I was because I was a smart mouth player. And so when I was at Elon, at the end of my career coaching, I had this set of twins. And they were these 5'8" black twins that were my karma. Everything I did as a college player, I got karma because of how they were to me. I understand the business I gave my coaches because every day it was me being like, what'd you say? Turn around. Let me see. What were you saying? And we joke now about the stories of it was me and those two all the time. And so I just try and coach against the player I was because I had such a smart mouth. I know it's a shock. It's a shock.
Well, we've given some business to some people together, so I understand how that works.
You don't want to see Rios and me together. That right there.
I've kind of seen that. We've got a question from the Facebook Live audience, and there's some things that it's a really good question, and this could go to both of you. How do you get neighboring clubs to be more sensitive to social injustice? And I'm not sure that you can get partnerships from other clubs willingly, but maybe you can. Maybe you have those friendships. But I know, Robert, you're in Vegas, and it's the socioeconomics of Las Vegas. Everybody thinks of the glitz and glamour and all the Ocean's 11 movies and stuff like that. But I've been there firsthand, and so is Jen, and it's not as ritzy as everybody would like to think.
You know, I think it's an interesting question. How do we assist other programs? And look, we just try and open up special events and special opportunities. Like if Jen's going to come, we're going to try and open that up to other members of the community. If we do coach education, if we bring in folks, we're going to open that up. And I think that's the most important thing. I think the other thing, you know, you all are a part of a region. I think the other thing is being involved with your region and advocating for your region to take and be more involved. Obviously, this is an outreach opportunity by the region itself. In the SCBA, I serve the region as well, and it's important for me to try and have a voice and a good standing so that we can talk about some of these issues. We can talk about and get the leadership of the region to understand as we expand, grow, as we deal with these difficult moments, and trying to have those conversations with as many people as possible. Ultimately, there are other clubs, and clubs exist for a multitude of reasons, and many clubs exist because they believe, at least, that they're different than the other program in town. Mm-hmm. You know, we work really hard to be the best version of ourselves, and again, we don't always get it right, but we're going to work hard to be the best version and to create the best opportunities. And by modeling that and by staying focused and true and doing what we say and say what we do, you know, I think that's the best opportunity. We certainly have started. I've reached out to other program directors, club owners on a multitude of issues. It's not always comfortable and easy. I think just like the collegiate game, what we find is boys, men's volleyball, typically we're really competitive. We want to win, but we're pretty darn friendly. The girls' side of the game is a little different. It's for some reason on the boys' side, we seem to have a lot less, and we have a mentality of abundance. On the women's side of the game, it seems like there's a lot more, but we have this mentality of scarcity, and we're fighting viciously to keep our little toehold. I don't know that I understand it fully, and I certainly don't want to demean or attack anyone, but it's an interesting difference as someone who's the director of a program that has both and has had success on both sides of the sport. It's just an interesting observation that I don't know that I'm smart enough to fix. Maybe that'll be Jen's next problem solving era.
I will say this: Rios is, you know, in the committees. He's in the conference and all that. For me, it is, I don't care about those other clubs. I'm going to talk about social justice and do such amazing things in my club that those other clubs are going to want to follow me, that their players are coming over. I am worried so much about my house and the work that my clubs, my coaches have to do, my athletes have to do. I'm going to put in a great educational system. I'm going to put in a great, scholarship. I'm going to do so much in my own home that other people are going to talk about so much that other clubs are going to want to follow suit. Because I think the problem I see is that people are worried about the other club instead of worrying about the work that they're doing. Instead of saying, you know what, I'm not worried about them. We're going to develop such a great entity here that they're going to have no choice but to want to follow us because they see how the athletes react to this success, both on the court and then the cultural and educational competence we are giving them.
Jen, I got a question for you. Can we have a working definition of intersectionality that applies to what we're doing?
Yeah, so it's this idea that we all have different identities and that they intersect and in very complex ways. Like you will never just be Black and a male, you will always be a Black male. Rios will never just be a Latinx and a male, he will always be a Latinx male. Those intersections are very critical. The intersection is why white women got to vote in 1920 and Black and brown women didn't get to vote till the 50s and 60s. And we have to acknowledge that intersection. It's, the matter of how we talk about our Black and brown athletes. They're too aggressive, they're loud. Why are they always over there so loud? We hear them. But then when we talk about our white female athletes, they're just passionate. Look at them having fun. And so those intersections are really critical in how we describe our athletes, the feedback we give our athletes. I have these Black girls on my team and they just have so much attitude. And I see the white girls doing the same thing. It's just like, well, they're just passionate. They're just figuring it out. And it's like, we have to understand why at those intersections are we giving different feedback, different definition about them.
That leads to this question that came off Facebook Live, and this is something that could be a Jiva, a whole operation for the Jiva operation to look at. It's when you have a club that's housed in an area or that hosts a tournament in an area where there's a lot of minorities, and the team is minorities, mostly minorities, I should say, and the language that is used at a tournament that is overheard is not good for anybody. What should we say to those coaches who are dealing with stuff like that? Besides, talk to your people in the higher ups in the food chain of the region. But what should they say to their players? What should they say to the coaching staff and their players?
I would tell them that it is absolutely unacceptable that they are thinking it's just a Black and brown problem. The words I hear coming out of these white girls' mouths, holy crap. And that is an explicit example of intersectionality, that we are saying because we are in a minority area, this language we hear is so inappropriate, as if we do not hear it at tournaments that are predominantly white. And that is the perfect example of intersectionality. And so I would say, if I was a club director, it is absolutely unacceptable that you think I will say anything to those Black and brown athletes because you are not saying anything to your white athletes. Your white athletes are singing songs and saying the N-word. Your white athletes are calling their friends B's and H's and all this. Your white athletes are doing all of that stuff. And if you are not acknowledging that, then you are part of the problem. To think that this is only a minority problem, and it is not. That shows that you are not paying attention to what your white athletes are doing. And it's unacceptable. And I would never, if anybody came to my team and said something, you see how passionate I am now, I would blow them out the water because they are not acknowledging that their white girls and their white boys are doing the exact same thing and maybe even have more problematic language.
What I mean by that is if you're the players, like if it's me, right? I overhear these things. What do I tell my coaches? What do I tell my staff members? I'm like, this is something that these aggressions that you speak of are now being spoken at them or overheard while they're passing by, or maybe they're selling something at their concession stand or something. And these are words that are being overheard. That's also something else that we have to do. There's one side of it, obviously, but what do we tell the other kids who are being demeaned in a way?
So you're saying that there are people making racial comments?
That was what I believe the question to be. Yeah.
That if you hear white kids making racial comments, then you need to be talking to their coaches. There needs to be accountability happening with that. 110%. And if white people hear the comments, they're expected to tell other white people that that's not acceptable. They are expected to say something. If they hear racial comments, they are absolutely expected to say something. They cannot allow that to go on. They cannot allow themselves to be silent. Well, that's just not my business. I don't know that club. I don't know if I'd want someone saying that to my daughter. If your daughter's saying racial stuff, I would hope you'd want somebody to say something to her. So yeah, if you hear something, you say something.
Robert, I have a question for you that I thought would be really interesting is how do you go about selecting coaches for your program? And then how did you go about selecting coaches for your SCBA high performance program? Also,
let's talk about your clothing for SCBA.
Or your clothing for your region.
Whatever.
Look, you're going on mute now. So look, I think for us in our program, I mean, we really want to be a nationally competitive, nationally relevant program, and that's been our thrust in terms of the volleyball context from the beginning. Because can we facilitate great kids playing high level volleyball and help them transition to whatever is next for them? Not focused exclusively on any level of participation, but can we help advance them with what is best for them, best for their scenario, best for their situation. When we go out and look for coaches, again, for me, it's really important when we run our girls program, and we've been very fortunate and it's improving every year. Really plainly, I go out and look for great coaches, and I go out and look for great women who are either already coaches or want to be coaches. It's again really essential to us. We only have me coaching women on our coaching girls on our women's side of our program, on the girls side of our program. I'm the only other person that who's a head coach that's not a woman. And again, it's not by accident. It's interesting. We had hired a coach who came, and I think sometimes you have to make really difficult decisions. We had a coach who came and we had a lot of pushback, and we really had to do a lot of listening to our staff. Again, our staff is 90+% women. We had to listen to our athletes. And what we kept hearing were there were some messages that were inconsistent. There was some attitude and language that was different, or expectations that were different for the girls than there were for the boys. Mm-hmm. And as we kept investigating, as we kept talking, as we kept making sure that our athletes felt comfortable talking about those concerns, we ultimately arrived at a place where we actually dismissed a coach in the middle of a qualifier. We felt so strongly, and we're going to side with the girls, with the athletes, with the women on our staff, and so it was really important to me that we didn't just push it under the rug, but we took the most strong action we could take at the time. And I think again, what's challenging is when you're talking about staff, that's a very difficult but more doable thing when we're talking about adults and staff. When you're talking about athletes who are minors, perhaps it's more nuanced. For sure, we want to condemn the behavior. For sure, we want to insert ourselves into some education. I think though that there are some lines there when you're just dealing with minors that are real, and we have to be mindful of those boundaries and lines, and we have to involve parents, and we have to make sure that the conversations are including parents. So how do we choose our coaching staff? The best coaches that we can find and the best people who want to be coaches. And if it's the girls side of our program, it's a priority that those great people are women. It's very conscious. It's very intentional. And I think you have to be intentional about these things, and you have to look at it. With regard to the SCBA, the high performance program for us is something that we take very seriously. We're very proud of the program we've built. We're really fortunate, and we have an embarrassment of riches in terms of universities around our region and in our region. So we're pretty fortunate with that. Certainly a lot of kids nationally want to end up at the schools that happen to be in and around our region. So we're fortunate with that. When we went to build our coaching staff, we had a few criteria. One is they had to either be a spectacular coach or affiliated with an institution where kids really wanted to go. Secondly, for me, we had to increase the diversity of our staff. And I think probably our staff is more diverse, and there are more people of color and different genders working within our program than any. And we're really proud of that. And again, it's not by accident. It's very intentional. It was an absolute objective. And so when the argument is, well, that's hard. Well, okay, it's hard. I don't know. If it's your objective and you're focused, and like Jen said earlier, winning a championship is hard. But if that's your objective, are you going to shy away from the work required to achieve your goal? So when we set out our objectives, when we set out our goals for our staff, maybe it's hard, but we're not going to shy away from that challenge either.
Jen, you and I have a friend that, and I think Robert also knows this gentleman who won a gold medal at Worlds last year. And he's now the head coach at University of Rhode Island. And is he the only person of color to have ever won a gold medal as a coach? Because when we look at our staffs, you've got a young man on the bench who may be Asian, who's doing all the data volley stuff and doing the scouting. You have athletes out there who are obviously of color, but there are no coaches of color. And then when you look at the 8A1 program, kind of look like the same thing. So how diverse and how much modeling should be going into the thought of when, as Robert just said, SCVA is looking for more diversity in their coaches at the national level? Because if those coaches are there when these young inner city kids go to try out, New York City, Philadelphia, wherever they are, they'll go, oh, okay, I see somebody like me. Maybe I'll try this out and I'll stay with the sport.
Yeah, I think it's tough. USA Volleyball is not diverse. I mean, it's actually interesting how diverse the boys' side is compared to the girls' side. I was coaching an 18s team, and we were in Chicago for that tournament. That's like the boys, like one of the biggest boys tournament. And I'm just walking around like, oh my gosh, this boys' side is so diverse. I mean, I'm just seeing the diversity. And on the women's side, it's not like that. It's not. It's more of a moneymaker. And it pains me to say that. The more money you have, the higher up you're going to get the training. You're going to get the constant touches. You're going to get the stuff you need. And then, I mean, occasionally we'll see like Ramat, who is this great basketball player who is able to transfer over to volleyball. But again, you have AAU basketball where they don't pay anything to club volleyball where a season might be $10,000.
Yes.
And so I really think that USA Volleyball needs to acknowledge like we have a diversity problem at our top. And why is that? Like, why is it that Nikki Salin, who was coaching for USA, decided to go coach for Rios, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, why is that? When you're at USA Volleyball and Rios is able to snatch you away, what's happening with that diversity problem? I coached for USA Volleyball, and it was like you only get to a certain level, and it's pretty obvious. And other Black and brown coaches only get to certain levels, and that's obvious. And so what is it about these head coaches that are only shoulder tapping those that they know, which are predominantly all white? And so we have to acknowledge that that's a problem and put more of an emphasis on those coaches to say, hey, what is the method that you're using to diversify your staff, to train that staff? Because there are a lot of Black and brown athletes at the top schools that could be going on to coach, but that are not, and asking that question, why?
Do you have any advice for club directors that may be useful to attain more inclusive programming from top to bottom, so they can do some of the things that we're talking about?
You got to interrogate the hell out your whiteness. If you are not thinking about whiteness, if you are not reading up about whiteness, if you are not researching about whiteness, you will not be able to make a truly inclusive club because you are not seeing your blind spots. This is not the time to read about blackness. It's about the time to read about whiteness. Because you reading about us doesn't matter if you're not reading about what does me being white and having a white lens and having a predominantly white team and a white staff and a white all white athletes mean for these people of color. How can I make more inclusive spaces for people of color to come into? And so I really think it's interrogating whiteness. And I am very cognizant that it's hard for white people to understand that they're racialized, that they are white. But until they understand that and say, I am white, and I need to start interrogating myself of what that lens means. Because as a Black person, I think, Carl, you know, as a Latinx person, Rios, that's all we think about. That identity, we think about it, how we navigate spaces, how we walk through the world. My mom was an 82-year-old white woman. When I went to the store with her, I could not just reach into her purse and grab cash out. I'm a 4-year-old Black woman with an afro in a sleeve. I had to interrogate my Blackness to protect myself when I'm with my white mom. And if you are not interrogating your whiteness to see what blind spots you have in your club, you're really not going to create an inclusive space. And I know that's tough to hear, but it's the truth.
Interrogate seems like a harsh tone, but what you're actually, if I'm right, what you're meaning is question why you see the way you see the world and try and make that a little bit easier to, when you make your decisions, when you have your language and you hire your coaches, that kind of thing? Or is it something even more deeper than that, with more depth?
Interrogate's not a harsh word because you've never had to interrogate your Blackness. You've always known about your Blackness.
Okay.
You've never had to think about that. And so it would be something I would say you need to interrogate what it means to be an able-bodied person. So you're going to interrogate your language, how you access spaces, how other people access spaces. When you help able-bodied, you know, when we see somebody that's maybe in a wheelchair and we're like, oh, I want to help you. And they're like, no, Carl, I'm fine. No, but I need to help you. I want to help you. Interrogate why we feel the need to diminish their abilities. And so that's what interrogating means, is that saying, why do I think the way I think? Why has history been presented the way it has? Why has this idea of professionalism been presented the way it is? Why are all these things about whiteness presented the way I'm? And interrogate yourself, your lens, the friendship groups you have, the language you use. Yet I mean interrogate, because if you want to change something, you have to interrogate it.
I appreciate that. Is there a way that we can, some language, because I know we have a few more minutes. Is there a way that we can address intersectionality and avoid some pitfalls with our athletes? Because we're going to say something, we're not 100% perfect. And with sarcasm can come some problems. And I'm talking to probably two of the most sarcastic people I know. I'm sorry, one of them. I'm sorry, one of them. Right. Yeah. Anyway, how can we avoid that? Because sometimes you're like, you know, you forget your place sometimes and you're talking to a minor and you just go, well, that was really good. And then they're like, oh no, not again. And then you have an issue. So how can we work on that to make sure that we're better with our athletes? Or maybe it's something we can't do. Maybe it's something that's just ingrained in us. We have to just deal with.
I think it's a mindfulness. And I think for me, again, I consider it an enormous privilege to have the friends I do. I also think having the friends that I have causes me to want to be a better person, causes me to think about the world I create for myself, causes me to look at my own existence and the privilege that I have that's afforded to me based on my passability. Candidly, my passability affords me tremendous privilege that maybe people wouldn't be aware of, you know. And you know, I'm fortunate in a lot of ways because of my education, because of the way I speak, because of whatever the light color of my skin. I'm able to often get some privilege because of those things, and I am aware of those things. I do the work to have the conversations, to have the introspection, to have the reflection, to simply be aware of those things and make sure that I'm continuing to advocate for a life for everyone that is the same. that I would want for myself, that I would want for my children. And it's really important, I think, just to look at yourself. And again, as you noted, I am a sarcastic person. I have a pretty sharp sense of humor. I'm not going to be perfect. And it's not an excuse, by the way. I don't give myself permission to be imperfect, but I do give myself grace to get things wrong and then fix them later. I don't give myself permission to say the wrong thing. I give myself grace when I do make a mistake to try to rectify that situation and not make that same mistake again. And I think there's an enormous difference here. I think there's an enormous difference. I think what we're seeing is there are people who want permission to sort of exist the way that is comfortable, rather than doing the work to be better or the best version of themselves, and then affording themselves grace when there's an area of darkness or a blind spot, as Jen says, right? There's an enormous difference there. There's an enormous difference. If I'm doing the work, I will discover some blind spots. And I can give myself the grace to go back, do the research, do the investigation, seek information, seek education, and be better there. Enormously different than saying, well, I just can't be perfect. That to me is totally unacceptable, right? We wouldn't accept that of a volleyball player. Well, I do my best, I just can't pass well. I mean, that person's not going to be on the court, I don't think.
Correct.
Yeah. I would say with that aspect is this idea of what type of space do you create that your athlete would be able to say, Rios, what you said was inappropriate, and you apologize. But if you don't have that space where if they were like, Rios, what you said was problematic, you know me, I would never mean that. That wasn't my intent. You're just being sensitive. Oh my gosh, these darling daughters are so sensitive. They can't even take a joke. Well, now that athlete's not going to listen to you or not going to respond to you. So ask yourself, when you do make a mistake, have you created this space where they can call you on it? And that you can say, I apologize, I'll be better. Because that's the role modeling that should be doing, not trying to say, no, that wasn't my intent and push it away. And then they don't want to say anything again. And then what happens is that you keep saying stuff. They don't say anything. They tell their parents, you're called into a meeting. And then you're like, why didn't they just say something? If they would have said something, I would have known. It's like, but they did. You just chose not to listen. And you didn't want to change yourself. And then it comes that whole, well, they just want us to be politically correct. I didn't grow up that way. Why do we have to be politically? It's like, it's not about being politically correct. It's about understanding that language changes. There's nuance in language, and you have to accept that what you were able to say before is not acceptable. Back in the day, they would call biracial people mulattoes. That is not acceptable. And if you can't shift with the language, you're going to have a really hard time, because we just don't want to acknowledge that. We don't want to acknowledge the shifts in language, and that maybe what you did previously was problematic. And instead of saying, well, okay, that was problematic, let me change. It's more of well, I used to do that and it was fine. Why can I do that now? And getting mad.
That is a great way to wrap this up. Coach, friend, compadre, former roommate, Rob Rios, I appreciate you giving us some time between the sessions that you have going on in your gym in Vegas United. My Chappelle friend, Jen Fry, I appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate you guys for actually having this discussion, because I think the educational part of this, where coaches can go out and club directors can go out and seek knowledge, I think is a really important point. And I look forward to talking with you guys again offline more about this too. There's one thing I wanted to leave with everybody before we went. It's a quote from a famous athlete: "A man who views the world the same at 50 as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life." And that athlete was Muhammad Ali. Like to thank you again for another edition of Jiva Live. And again, I'd like to thank our guests, Jen Fry, Robert Rios, for an enlightening conversation. We'll see you next week, probably at the usual time at 5 p.m. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Bye.